Chapter 31. Returning to Earth as the only magical creature. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. In the Holy Cathedral of the Slain Theocracy. The building had a large domed roof constructed from stained glass. Countless semi-transparent shards were arranged in intricate patterns, refracting the sun's rays in a kaleidoscope of colors. Red, green, lilac, and a plethora of other hues combined to create mesmerizing fractals of light and shadow. It created a solemn and yet sanctified atmosphere that could command reverence from all. Within the building stood numerous statues, each asserting by its presence a historical tale of heroes and saints. Carefully arrayed candles that burned in silence granted the interior an enchanting serenity, and within the center of the church stood 4 statues, appearing to watch over all things mortal. Beneath each of these statues were countless candles. In the middle stood a kind-faced old man closing his eyes and muttering prayers. Suddenly, the candle under the statue of one of the gods went out, and he let out a sigh. So, Abir has fallen. And without taking the next step too, his soft words carried sadness. He lowered his head even more and prayed faster. May you ascend to heaven and enter the kingdom of the gods. After a long time, the old man stopped praying and turned around, looking behind him. In the darkest corner of the room stood a solitary figure bathed lightly by the roof's light and leaning against a stone pillar. The old man asked, "Who killed Abir?" "There are not many who can do so with such ease." Could it be that the Queen of the Silver Moon Kingdom moved personally? The figure pushed itself off the pillar and stood erect. There appeared to be huge wings behind their back. But whether they were clad in feathers or leathery skin, none could tell. Spread open, they revealed nothing but a bubbling, restless and shapeless darkness. No. I am always watching the Silver Moon Kingdom. The day she dares step out of it, we will personally make sure she dies. She cannot have slipped by me. I guarantee it. It was a female voice filled with endless holiness. She spoke slowly, and her soft tone seemed capable of melting even the most unrepentant criminal into a puddle of contrition. If not the queen, then who else could strike thus? The old man asked, puzzled. A dragon. Specifically, a demigod primordial dragon. A demigod, primordial dragon, he asked, unable to keep his voice low. Indeed. They should all be extinct, but this one, in particular, has been wandering, lost in the starry sky for millennia. I do not know precisely how it arrived on the continent, but it must be related to Corandia. The saintly voice rose in volume before continuing in a demonic and bloodthirsty tone. What? Do you need us to go probe the dragon? TCH, a demigod primordial dragon is a truly inconceivable existence. I am also just as curious. The old man quickly collected himself after hearing the explanation. He did not seem bothered by the figure's strange outburst. He muttered to himself and shook his head. Although demigods are terrifying, once their divine power is exhausted, it is possible to make them fall. But a demigod primordial dragon with unknown roots should not be provoked. If we waged a full-scale war against it, we would suffer heavy losses. If it was only the dragon we had to worry about, then so be it, but I'm worried about our other enemies. The head of the Theocracy's Holy Iris Knight Order has fallen, Central City has also been lost, and yet you are still able to endure it. Humans are really strange, haha. The charming voice carried a bit of mockery. The old man remained undisturbed and spoke with indifference. Glory and shame are but transient things. Only humanity's future is truly worth stressing over. At this time, the church door suddenly opened. A tall woman, as beautiful as a flower, stepped in with her head held high. She wore silver-white light armor covered with monk robes of the same color. When she walked into the church and saw the old man, she kneeled with one knee and spoke with a noble voice, "Your Holiness." At the sight of the young girl entering, the bizarre invisible figure had long hidden into the darkness, while the old man looked at the lofty and pure girl and gently said, "Rosalia." "Hello, Earth." I'm back again. After setting foot on Earth once more, Louis was overcome by a feeling of nostalgia. The moment he arrived he began to take note of his surroundings. Given the trouble the intelligent brain had caused him before, he wanted to make sure he hadn't teleported to some grossly inadequate location. Fortunately, what Louis saw was the familiar tropical jungle. He lowered his head to gaze at the pool of water beneath his feet. As a lizard, he felt that this pool of water was as vast as a lake, but now, to a 10-meter-long reptile, it was simply a puddle. He did not know how long it had been in total since he first became a dragon, but crossing over to the other side and demolishing the army and city only took a day altogether. In this short amount of time, Louis's life had changed completely. Sighing, Louis closed his eyes and felt for the differences between Earth and the other world. It seemed that while the magic climate of San Soliel was hyperactive, Earth's was rather inert. If the former world's magic could be described as a flowing river, then Earth's was a lump of rock. Earth also had a kind of magic called spiritual power. Given that, there should have been transcendental powers, analogous to San Soliel's gods, in existence. But according to the intelligent brain, there were no magical creatures on Earth. It seemed that the birth of transcendental powers was determined by special energy fluctuations unique to San Soliel. This special energy belonged to the root of the world, and the lack of that energy on Earth meant that it could not create a real transcendent. It was no wonder, then, that human beings could only find scammers and not a single person with a true command over the supernatural. That is to say, I became the only magical creature on Earth. The only one who can use transcendental power. Louis's eyes lit up as he suddenly felt that he could easily do his business on Earth. Earth's level of technology was not weak. If it invaded the other world with nuclear bombs, then other than the gods, the people of Earth would be able to annihilate everyone, even those at the legendary rank, easily. But there were some magical abilities that even the advanced Terrans could not understand, let alone the Earth's. Given that, the people of Earth would not be able to cope in the face of bizarre magic. This oversight on their part would be key to Louis's progress. Chapter 32. Single for a long time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Louis bent his head closer to the ground, carefully observing it along with the surrounding environment. From the terrain, it seems like not much time has elapsed on Earth. Louis asked with uncertainty. As a human, he had seen countless anime and novels involving reincarnation. Louis was quite familiar with the time-dilatory effects of transmigration. He could not guarantee that the rate at which time moved for the two worlds was 1-to-1. It might even be extremely different. There are significant differences between the speed of time in both worlds. The specifics vary depending on certain factors, but on average, in San Soliel, 10.30 days will be equivalent to 1 day on Earth. Before Louis could ask, the intelligent brain had already answered his question. So that's how it is. Louis sprang up, nervous. That's not right. If it's as you say, then spending a day or two on Earth would mean 10 days to half a month in San Soliel. Louis could not help but be shocked. If the time difference was like that, then if he wasn't able to find enough food for Dragon City in 1.2 days, then when he returned to Dragon City, about only 10% of the population would be left. The people there would have already starved to death without any food, increasing his reputation as a cruel dragon. Although Louis believed that the elves would send some rations to the city, he also knew that they had their own food problems. If Cisna was not lying, then they would only be able to provide a few days' worth of food. Louis could not count on the elves. He could only count on himself. Louis felt a little awkward. He estimated that there were around 100,000 people in the city at present. How was he able to provide for them in just a day or two? Putting aside the fact that he was a dragon in human society, even if he was a rich business magnate, mobilizing that amount of food would take time. Host need not worry. The ratio of time passage is dependent on your location. If you spend half a month on Earth, then only a day or two will pass in San Soliel. No matter where you are, the flow of time in the other world would slow down. That is, extremely convenient. Louis felt slightly incredulous at the intelligent brain's words. Although his godhood had an ability related to time, it was not something that belonged to him. Although he could use it, he didn't understand the nature of time at all. This is one of the greatest achievements of the Terran civilization's world traveling. The intelligent brain replied indifferently. In that case, wouldn't they be invincible? If the world your kind invaded did not master such technology, it would have been wiped out without any resistance, right? How terrifying it would be to face an enemy that could utilize the time ratio. Assuming the Terrans sent out an army, and after a bitter battle their expeditionary force was wiped out, then it could simply send out another army at its own pace. For the invaded worlds, however, hardly any time would have elapsed before the next barrage. If the Terrans could do this, they would constantly assault any opponents until they broke their defenses down. However much time the Terrans needed to remobilize, the invaded world would only have a fraction before beginning battle anew. Time adjustment requires the consumption of energy. For individuals, this is not particularly difficult, but for invading armies the costs are astronomical. When the Terran civilization invaded any undeveloped civilizations, it generally synchronized the time between the two worlds as soon as it opened the space-time tunnel. Time adjustment was generally only used for scouting missions. So that's it. They let the scouts spend years or even decades in the other world collecting detailed information, before using it to draft an invasion plan. Louis nodded his head. Although he knew little about the details of wars at the civilizational scale, knowing that he could stay on Earth for a while longer was enough. Now he had enough time to think of a plan. Setting his mind at ease, Louis began to wander the rainforest. His body was now 10 meters long and he possessed the strength of a juvenile dragon. As long as the intelligent brain did not lie to him, there would be no magical creature in this world at all. While he could not match sophisticated human weaponry, among the beasts of the world he was the truest apex predator. Tigers, lions, and even elephants could do nothing to him. In addition to his dragon might, there was nothing for him to be afraid of. He did not have to hide in the soil anymore like when he was a lizard. He could now swagger through the rainforest as he pleased. The tropical rainforest was humid and sultry, but this was nothing for Louis. The magic runes on his scales were not for show. Aside from helping to resist physical attacks, they also kept his temperature at a comfortable level. This particular feature was why dragons could afford to take baths in lava. It wouldn't harm them in the least but packed enough heat to at least warm their bodies a little. Come to think of it, when I was still human I always wanted to experience living in the great outdoors. I always envied those researchers who could investigate and experiment with the various kinds of wildlife in their habitats too, Louis exclaimed. His frame bulldozed through the forest like a heavy tank, felling trees and crossing rivers easily. Countless animals scattered at the mere hint of his appearance. Wow, look! Could that be a jaguar? Those are some lovely limbs, and look at that beautiful fur. That crocodile too. Its teeth look so sharp, and its skin looks like it has a delightful rough feel to it. Louis walked all the way and saw countless animals that were both familiar and unfamiliar. Seeing some especially beautiful female animals, he could not help but become aroused. But Louis quickly banished the terrible ideas from his head. Jesus! I've been single for so long that even animals have started to turn me on. The animals that Louis was looking at were scared and trembling on the ground, not even daring to move. Their mouths let out pitiful wails, allowing Louis to rub their stomachs at his discretion. In Louis's heart, he chanted "I'm not a pervert" and "I'm not interested in female animals" over and over again. But suddenly, the sound of movement nearby caught his attention. Chapter 33. The Power of Faith. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Woo-woo. Jaligulu. Gulu gulu. After becoming a dragon, Louis's vision and hearing had outclassed the senses of mundane creatures. If he condensed some of his divine power into his eyes, he could peer into the deepest secrets of the world if he so wished. He spent some time marveling at his powerful vision. With its acuity, he could analyze the components of matter on a molecular level. With one glance he could peer at the quarks, leptons, and atoms that made up the world around him. For regular humans of a technological civilization, the elementary particles and fundamental forces were the means by which they understood reality. The gods, however, were more concerned with the underlying rules of the universe than they were with matter and energy. The sound Louis had heard was not the roar of an animal, and a closer listening didn't tag it as any modern language he was aware of either. Interest piqued, he made his way towards it. Perhaps in San Soliel, he might have been more careful, but here in the forest, as the literal king of the jungle, he had nothing to fear. Soon the mystery cleared itself up. Intelligent brain, is this really 21st century Earth? Louis asked his companion telepathically. The probability of the teleportation having failed, is extremely minuscule. I am confident that this is the same planet that the host departed from. Hearing its answer, Louis took a deep breath. Then why are there still primitive people here? In his line of sight, he could make out 20 to 30 dark-skinned people. None of them, male or female, clothed their torsos, and all wore only a short piece of cloth over their loins. Their skins were painted with strange colors. Of the men, some had pierced lips while the women had coiffured their hair in exotic hairstyles. They carried wooden spears, and some held crude bows and arrows whilst herding a group of crocodiles by the other side of the river. Through the gaps between the trees, Louis could make out straw houses in the distance. This confirmed his perception of the people's underdevelopment. Primitive people. A spark of insight flitted through his brain. I got it. So I'm in the Amazon rainforest. When he was an undergraduate student, Louis loved to watch television and read books. Although he did not know the technical details of things, he knew a lot of trivia. The clues had all perfectly aligned for Louis. The tropical rainforest, the primitive tribes, with these alone Louis could guess where he was. Am I in Brazil? Or perhaps some other country? Louis was slightly befuddled. How did a person end up millions of miles away from their home and in the thick of the Amazon? He pondered for a moment before deciding to reveal himself to the indigenes. They would pose little threat to him anyways. His appearance immediately caused an uproar. With his large frame, glittering scales, and lethal claws and teeth, the natives froze in both awe and fear. Bearing a golden crown he strolled with a kingly air before them. At the sight of him, the crocodile's instincts gave out completely. They cowered and lay prone on their bellies, not daring to move an inch. The natives on the other hand trembled and seemed to speak some words of their language to him. They raised their bows and spears, but their facial expressions clearly betrayed their terror. Louis could speak fluent Chinese as well as some basic English. In San Soliel, he could understand others' words due to his godhood. But here on Earth, it didn't seem to do anything. Looking at them, he felt a headache coming on. After obtaining the 5-color dragon god's godhood, Louis's very soul had been transformed, and at present, he could learn languages with extreme ease. Nevertheless, he still couldn't derive a language's entire lexicon in an instant. San Soliel had a magic spell called Proficient Language, but Louis did not yet know how to use it. Silence, you indigenes! Get down on your knees! Opening his maw, Louis roared at the indigenes. His declaration seemed to rend the air itself, and several tree branches snapped. Louis spoke neither Chinese nor English. Rather, he had communicated his intentions in dragon tongue. Louis had partly chosen to disclose himself out of boredom. The other part was from his perception of their circumstances. Looking at the natives, he could understand that their tribe had been untouched by modern civilization. The people became even more alarmed. They began to converse with one another in a heated and impassioned debate while making sure to keep an eye on the strange beast before them. Louis frowned. Their language itself was complete noise to him, and their chattering seemed more like the buzzing of flies. He filled his lungs with air and opened his mouth once more. A pulse of heat seemed to erupt from within him as his scales glowed and the air shimmered. A burst of golden flames erupted from his maw. It streaked across the riverside's mud, baking it to a crack dry before charring the crocodiles into blackened logs. It continued unabated and roared over the river. The waters instantly began to churn and bubble, releasing a hot white mist. This was the well-known dragon breath. Unlike the emerald dragon breath that he had used when he turned into a demigod dragon, this dragon breath belonged to Louis's own body. Louis noticed that within himself, the organ responsible for breathing flames had another unexpected function. This should be part of what the intelligent brain had said about his evolution being different from a normal dragon's. Louis suspected that this was also one of those changes, but in front of the indigenous people, he could not do experiments, so he only took note of it in his heart. "Kneel, mortals." Louis spoke once more. This time, the natives fell silent, looked amongst themselves, and collapsed onto their knees. Simultaneously they chanted the same word. At present Louis still could not understand their language, but given the context of the situation and his intelligence, he could understand that they regarded him as a deity of some sort. At that moment the godhood within him trembled almost imperceptibly. The divine power which had been depleted earlier had filled up just a little more. Is this the power of faith? Louis trembled inwardly. Chapter 34. Earth's Hegemon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Louis was definitely not a real god. He was only a dragon that had chanced unto the godhood of a dead one. As his godhood was neither connate nor something he had personally cultivated, he did not understand much about its abilities. BDNV with his divine power, he could replicate some divine abilities, but his efficiency in doing so was poor. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't understand how he was doing it. Louis had also racked his brains thinking about how to accumulate more divine power. At the moment, however, he felt elated as he realized that the natives could be useful in that regard. At the very least, Louis knew that even if he was not a god, he had the ability to collect divine power with his godhood. Is this because of their faith? Louis gazed at the natives who knelt before him. Even though Louis himself was an atheist, he could detect the devotion within them. Perhaps to these people, Louis's appearance, his ability to spit flames, and his speech were enough to convince them of his supernatural origins. At that moment he received a flash of insight. No wonder San Soliel is so backward, he wondered. Louis realized that San Soliel was quite possibly underdeveloped because the gods themselves had prevented any technological advancement. That its civilization had stagnated for millennia despite its plurality of realms, races, and magic could only imply that, in his opinion, when humans banished the unknown and grasped the truth by themselves, they would cease to worship deities. This was why modern societies tended to have high incidences of atheism and irreligiosity. So long as humans needed to turn to the gods for comfort, they would continue to worship them. The more primitive the society, the greater the reliance on deities. Of course, this was not absolute. As civilization advanced and populations boomed, the number of believers would often actually increase. What fell was their proportion in relation to the rest of the population. Louis felt he might have touched on something extremely important. He thought more carefully about the information he had obtained in San Soliel. That world had numerous gods and no particular god fostered a tremendous amount of believers. Moreover, even that backward world had its own share of irreligious people who officially worshipped under the banner of a god. It was not necessarily the case that the more believers a god had, the better. If that were the case, then the gods would likely have fought between themselves for absolute control over the faithful. There would definitely be more theocracies around in that case. Louis looked once more at the natives and decided to put those matters aside. This tribe, in addition to the 20 to 30 people who were driving off the crocodiles, and including the children and elderly, had only about 70 members. They would be suitable for a few experiments to better understand godhood. Their ignorance of modern scientific breakthroughs and phenomena made them good sources of faith. Their tribal structure, however, meant that they couldn't expand their numbers very easily. Louis surmised that this was likely why the gods did not keep all races in a primitive state. Well, I can always look deeper into that later. Right now I need to find some food. In a small, dilapidated village outside the Amazon jungle, 3 Apache helicopters landed. Under the gale of propellers, a group of locals held back their curious children and watched the aircraft's passengers alight with trepidation. The men were heavily armed and carried heavy bags bearing the insignia of the U.S. Army. Their numbers were small, but each bore a steely look in their eyes that only the hardest, toughest, and most exemplary of soldiers could bear. "Captain, now that we're here you have to tell us what this mission is about. The humidity here is killing me." An officer walked to his superior's side, complaining. The captain ignored his grumbling subordinate. His eyes were covered by a pair of thick dot-rimmed sunglasses and he shouted, "Attention." At this, all soldiers present, including the one pestering him a while ago, arranged themselves in a straight line. Each man stood erect with their fists firmly by their sides and their chest puffed out. The commander went over several cycles of ordering the soldiers to attention and ease. With his hands behind his back, the captain walked back and forth in front of the soldiers. "Our mission today has been ordered by the President himself as well as the Secretary of Defense." The soldiers kept their heads high and stayed motionless, but their eyes carried a gleam of expectation and excitement. "Sorry to disappoint you fuckers, but there's no one to kill or kidnap this time. We're here to do reconnaissance of this area with no other instructions. We'll be moving by foot, so prepare your asses for a long march." "Yes, sir." Despite some disappointment, the soldiers responded firmly. "Sir." At this moment a soldier spoke without looking away. "Speak, Private Bourne. Since we're here to investigate, what are they here for?" Bourne indicated, with a tilt of his head, towards the passengers that had alighted with the soldiers. "Over there is a professor of ecology from Stanford University and some of his students. They happen to be in Brazil right now to conduct ecological research on the Amazon jungle. In this unknown terrain, some expertise is required. This is also on orders from above." The captain paused before continuing with a smile. "He also gives us a good pretext for coming here. Professor Johnson is a well-known ecologist, and protecting him is quite important as he goes on this journey." At the captain's words, the soldier nearly broke out into laughter. What excuse could be more superfluous? As members of the United States Army, the defenders of the free world who would stop them from roaming wherever they pleased. Their battleships could wander any waters they wished, and their planes could bomb whoever they wanted to oblivion. Given this small-scale operation, what was the point of even giving an explanation? Chapter 35. Bestowing an Artifact. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The 5 people from Stanford University were organizing their equipment before their trek through the jungle. Among them was a beefy middle-aged man who directed the remaining 4. He was Professor Johnson, and the 4 individuals accompanying him were his students. 3 of them were male, and the last was female. "Professor, why are those soldiers following us exactly?" the Soul Lady asked. "I genuinely don't know, Lucy. This morning the university called, asking to let them accompany us. Apparently, the Department of Defense is involved in some way." Professor Johnson's tone also carried a bit of dissatisfaction. With his status and accomplishments, he did not feel comfortable being rushed into this kind of collaboration without more information. "Well, let's just consider them as bodyguards. The forest is full of dangers after all. So long as they don't interrupt our research, it should be fine. And who knows? They might turn out to be useful," the professor continued. He gave a helpless shrug. At this juncture, one of the other men spoke. "That's right, Lucy. This place is just teeming with danger. There are poisonous insects and fierce beasts by the dozen, and these soldiers might give us an added layer of protection. He courteously spoke, and eyed her affectionately. If I didn't understand your love for zoology I would never have brought you here. Goddamit Dylan, do you ever stop? Lucy snapped. At once the remaining students broke out into sniggers. It was common knowledge that Dylan was head over heels for Lucy. He came from a wealthy background, and Lucy, one of the most beautiful ladies of the university, was someone he had been courting for a long time. The two were already considered by most on campus to be a couple. The professor smiled inwardly at this and reminisced over his own youth. From the corner of his eye, he made out the bespectacled captain approaching them. He clapped loudly to call his students' attention. All right guys, let's finish prepping. I'll be having a chat with the captain in the meantime. He then walked over to meet the military man. The officer saluted the professor before taking out a map. I apologize for the interruption, Professor. I'm sure it's inconvenient in many ways, but there's little we can do about such direct orders. It's no big deal. I'm only a citizen, but I know that sometimes our cooperation can go a long way. In any case, you aren't the one inconveniencing us. Your bosses are. The professor's words were amicable but conveyed his slight annoyance with the arrangement. The commander smiled apologetically and handed the map to him. Please take a look. The area marked here is our destination. I am not at liberty to explain the mission's contents, but will you be able to help guide us there nonetheless? Professor Johnson looked at the map and frowned. This is quite deep into the forest. I have no problem taking you there as it happens to be within my scope of research. However, it's best that I make something clear. Though there is little conflict in this area, it is nevertheless quite dangerous. I would appreciate it if you could listen to my advice as we go through it. It could be the difference between life and death. No problem, Professor, the captain laughed. I'll keep those bastards of mine in line. In that case, the professor nodded and pointed at an area on the map. I would suggest landing here. Of all the areas close to your target, it's the most suitable for a helicopter landing. The professor drew a circle over the designated area before continuing. I must confess beforehand, officer, that neither I nor my students have any military training. If you wish to conduct any military maneuvers like helicopter taxiing, I'm afraid you'll find us incapable. No need to worry about that, Professor. I have kept in mind you and your students' abilities. The captain and the professor discussed some more details related to the mission. After both had hashed out all likely contingencies, they separated to finish their preparations. The two men came from different walks of life. One a soldier, the other a scholar, but neither knew that this expedition strange would herald great changes to Earth and humanity. Deep in the Amazon jungle, Louis was lying at the edge of a pool of water. His golden scales could repel most mud and dirt, but some grime still managed to cling to them and dulled their brilliant sheen. Louis felt slightly dissatisfied at this and decided that he needed some servants to wipe them clean. Under normal circumstances, pools like the one he lay in would be teeming with all sorts of life. Predators and prey of all sizes would engage in deadly tangos of life and death as they went about their business. However, Louis's presence had emptied the ecological niche of all its members. Within the few hundred meters surrounding his location, no small animals could be found. At this point, he had spent several days thinking about how to resolve the food shortage in Dragon City, but no solution seemed to work. 100,000 people really were too big of a population. Over the past few days, the natives had offered him good food and drinks, putting him in a pleasant mood. Nevertheless, he did not much care for their company, and he would mostly spend his time wandering the forest before returning to the tribe to collect their tributes. He had made an important discovery after finding the villagers. Whenever they worshipped him while he was in their village, he could feel his divine power fill up slowly. However, when he lost sight of the natives it would not stir, even if they prayed and sacrificed as normal. Louis was initially quite baffled by this problem. But he soon discovered a way around it. Because of his great appetite, Louis could finish their offerings in 2 days. The natives, however, kept trying to hunt for him even while they were hungry. This filled him with a sense of endearment towards them. At the very least, they were quite pious to their deities. For this reason, Louis felt that it would not be good if they starved to death. As a god, it was not good to rule by fear, and that he should at least answer the prayers of his believers. Of course, as a fake god, he couldn't actually reward them with divine arts. Neither could he personally hunt to feed them. No, that would diminish his divine prestige. And so he came up with another method of helping them out. Plucking a single one of his scales, he granted it to them. The scale contained a faint amount of his mighty presence, and the natives could take it along with them on their hunts. It would help decrease the resistance of their prey and improve their hunting efficiency. It also helped him in another way. Because the natives would worship the artifact he had bestowed upon them, he would be able to receive their faith at all times, even if he was not personally present. From this, Louis hypothesized that the statues of gods often served as conduits for the faith their believers devoted to them. Since he was not a true god, and so even if a statue was carved in his image, it would be useless. That said, the dragon scale was a part of his body. With his godhood, as long as the believers prayed to his scales, they could also pass on their small amount of faith to him. Although 70 believers were not many, for a fake god like Louis, it was already a rare asset. Just when Louis was thinking about gods and food, his acute hearing once again sensed something. This is the sound of human footsteps. Moreover, it's not just one person, but a group of people. Louis became alert. Chapter 36. Discovering a Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ho! Soldiers. And are those guides with them? No, more like researchers. Despite being a significant distance away, Louis' senses could pick up on the features of the new visitors as they approached. It was a small group of people, some of whom were armed to the teeth. He could detect about 15 of them. About 2/3 were combatants, and the remainder seemed to just plod along at their own pace. They trudged slowly through the forest, and from time to time the unarmed members of the group would crouch down for a closer look at some plant or animal before taking a photograph. If it's just an exploration, then why the need for soldiers? Louis felt slightly puzzled over this state of affairs. Indeed, there were many parts of the world that anthropologists, ecologists, and zoologists would love to visit, and the Amazon jungle was one of these scientific hotbeds. Many parts of it remained untouched by modern civilization, and as such there were many mysteries within it that were yet to be revealed. Naturally, it held a powerful allure for those of the biological sciences, but ideally, they should have been accompanied by local guides and not soldiers. Louis felt a sense of alarm creep up his spine. Have I perchance been discovered somehow? In that case, would this be a reconnaissance party? What shitty luck! Louis was sure that there were still many undiscovered species in the world. That said, he had only lived on Earth as a dragon for a few days, and he had never left the Amazon jungle. Who could possibly be so bored as to watch the forest day and night for any potential disturbance and then send a search party soon after? The Amazon jungle was absolutely huge, about half the landmass of China. It was crazy to think that someone had spent resources pouring through all the satellite footage of the area before finding a strange lizard. But this is also a chance for me to get in touch with modern humans. Perhaps it might prove to be quite fruitful. Louis' eyes flashed with excitement. As he had not yet mastered ultimate transformation, he could not yet sneak into human society. His large frame prevented him from doing so. Unless he transformed into a demigod again, he would be no match against human technology as well. Perhaps in the future, he would, but for now, it was impossible. Given that he was the only one on Earth with extraordinary powers, he could set aside some of his worries. Although scientific understanding had led to some impressive achievements, the lack of any true magic system meant he had an advantage over Earthlings in some respects. Not to mention, I don't need to make a permanent positioning device on the Earth's side. According to the intelligent brain, I can simply leave Earth anytime and return to the world of San Soliel. This is simply the best escape tool. With this confidence, Louis became bolder. Even if humans launched nuclear weapons, as long as he left Earth for San Soliel before it detonated, he could escape. Nuclear warheads could blow through matter, but could they destroy the very fabric of time and space? Of course not. If they were that powerful, perhaps the humans of Earth would already have colonized the stars. Feeling confident in his survivability, Louis began to ponder over his next course of action. Fullness for the bold, famine for the timid. No matter. I'll just do it like this. The forest's humidity would be nigh unbearable for most people from temperate climates, but the soldiers on the site had gone through worse in their training. If they had any qualms about the environment, it would be the need for frequent maintenance of their equipment. They did not know what their mission was, or what they were searching for. They were just acting according to the captain's orders. In fact, even the captain did not know what exactly this mission was going to be. Like the officers below him, he was simply a cog in the system. "Everyone, take 5, said Professor Johnson, who was in the lead. At his words, a few soldiers stopped and rested on the spot while others remained standing with their guards kept up. The students following the professor also took a breather. With the mosquitoes, insects, and humidity, the trek through the jungle was uncomfortable, to say the least. It was definitely not for the unprepared. The soldiers spoke in low voices, and the students began to talk and laugh, comforted by the security the military's presence afforded them. Professor Johnson took out a high-calorie bar to replenish his energy, but then he stood up. From the corner of his eye, he had detected something. He walked a short distance and parted the bushes. "Sweet Mother of God!" His cry put the soldiers on alert. Even the students rushed to their feet. The group came up behind Johnson. The captain was the first to ask a question. "What's wrong, Professor?" "These footprints," he pointed at several impressions on the earth. "Look closely at them. I have studied many animals, but they do not resemble anything I've seen before. Quick, take photos." The ecstatic students followed their professor's orders and rushed, cameras and rulers in hand, to document the discovery. The professor himself seemed to become increasingly agitated. "Unbelievable! Unbelievable! Can you believe it? From this footprint and these tail marks, the creature is definitely a few meters in size. Based on the firmness of the soil here and the depth of the footprint, I suspect that it weighs at least 30 tons. My God, even an African elephant weighs only a ton at most. There shouldn't be such a huge monster in the Amazon jungle. Can you guess what I'm guessing?" Johnson's voice went into a frenzy and even trembled with excitement. The captain and the soldiers, however, could not understand what he was getting at. "Dinosaurs. Out of all creatures that have appeared on Earth, the only ones to leave this kind of footprint, have such body length, and such weight would only be the Earth's former overlords. The race that had gone extinct 65 million years ago. Could it be that dinosaurs still exist in the Amazon?" The students chattered among themselves. The captain, on the other hand, kept his composure. Remembering his instructions and surmising that the footprints were related to his mission, he hurriedly turned to the professor and asked, "Professor, can this creature be tracked?" Even if they could not chase after the creature, they could still scan the area with a helicopter. It would be hard for such a behemoth to remain hidden given its size. As for any potential danger in encountering it, the captain was not too worried. They were a well-armed squad, and even if a Tyrannosaurus Rex appeared, they could gun it down easily. The real difficulty was taking it alive for study. Johnson's heart pounded in excitement. He too finally understood why the soldiers were here. The government had probably discovered something related to the creature that left these tracks, and it had sent the army to investigate. If so, he would cooperate with them even more. If they were to really find any prehistoric creature, he would be able to leave his name in history. The mud is still fresh. The creature just passed by here not long ago, and its size should prevent it from hiding its traces. We should catch up with it soon if we hurry. Then we give chase, the captain barked. At this, all parties' exhaustion fled from their bodies, and they excitedly followed the tracks. The road ahead only revealed more evidence that pointed to the size of the massive creature. Toppled trees, crushed shrubs, and deep footprints revealed more traces of its path and existence. Sir, I don't know why, but my heart is suddenly tightening. At this time, a soldier voiced his inexplicable unease. I also feel it. Be careful. I think something's not right. The captain's experience allowed him to feel the eerie silence. Terror went straight to his heart, causing him to take a deep breath, and he ordered his team to be on guard. It didn't take long before they heard the sound of flowing waters. As they made their way through the grove of trees, they arrived at the banks of a river. There, they found exactly what they were looking for. Chapter 37. Enemy of the Lord, Satan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Before the group lay a gigantic creature flexing its tail in boredom. As the professor predicted, its size easily reached 10 meters in length, but what stunned them more was its glamorous appearance. The reptile had a graceful but powerful frame that certainly seemed capable of flattening trees. Its scales, however, were the real eye-catcher. Under the mottled sunlight that pierced through the forest canopy, they glittered in an ethereal and enchanting gold. The professor was perplexed. Orthodox evolutionary theory would clearly deem such a predator as impossible. Its size would make it an easy target for its enemies, and its sheen would mean it was easy for its prey to recognize it from a distance. But how could the professor have expected that what awaited them was no dinosaur, but a creature from countless myths and legends? Gone. A dragon, Lucy croaked dryly. Its head was clearly reminiscent of the dragons of myth and was borne aloft by a slender yet brawny neck. On its back was a pair of bat-like wings, and its spinal column eventually gave way to a heavy and muscular tail. The tips of its powerful limbs were adorned with sharp claws. Each scale shone as though coated with a mysterious metal. And its inverted pupils gleamed with a cold but elegant light. Professor. This is not a dinosaur. This is a dragon. Shivering, Lucy managed to form a cohesive sentence. From her understanding, rather than from a Western standpoint, dragons were never good omens. Rather they were tyrants and destructive creatures. The original draconic legend originated from Mesopotamian and Babylonian mythology. The canonical clay tablet, the Enuma Elish, told of the creation of the world and gods by the deities Apsu and Tiamat. In the myth, the gods represented reproduction and sanctity, and dragons were forces of destruction. Under the cultural interpretation of Greek mythology and Christianity, dragons were further cast as symbols of greed and despotism. Impossible. How could this be? Unless. Could the myths of old actually be true? Professor Johnson first murmured in shock, followed by wild joy. A dragon. This is a dragon. Ha! What dinosaur? Those are simply crappy lizards in front of this. This will transform everything we know about ancient mythology, biology even. Compared to Professor Johnson and his students, the soldiers had composed themselves much faster. Nonetheless, each one was filled with shock and disbelief. They could not help but instinctively grasp their weapons a little tighter than before, and some began to swap out their live ammo for tranquilizer bullets. Captain, is this why we're here? To catch a fucking dragon. Ha! Private Bourne spoke with an expression that was at once excited and fearful. Somehow, each soldier felt a deep reluctance to confront the creature before them. Despite their training, they seemed to hold an almost genetic fear towards it, like rabbits in front of a lion. Yeah, this should be our target, said the captain with clear unease. Their superiors had basically told them to go poking around the area, and then a dragon had turned up soon after. If this wasn't what they were looking for, what was? Wait a minute. Look at its head. Professor Johnson exclaimed. In their stupor, everyone else had failed to notice something critical. Turning their eyes towards the dragon's head, they all saw that it sported a gorgeous crown. The headdress seemed a perfect match for the golden luster of its scales. That crown is definitely a human-made object, Professor Johnson murmured, followed by a change in countenance and a look of horror. Satan. Satan. It is written in the Bible that one of the signs of the apocalypse is the descent of a great, fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. Professor Johnson's words caused the faces of those who heard them pale. Although the dragon before them was a golden one and had only 1 head, the crown that it was wearing would indeed be reminiscent of the enemy of the Holy One. The captain was not entirely convinced. He comforted his men and steeled himself. Don't panic, Professor. Even if it really is a dragon, there's no way we can't gun it down if we need to. The ancients might have described dragons as being powerful, but they didn't possess the means we have now. At the captain's words, Professor Johnson calmed down, slightly embarrassed by his outburst. Indeed, he made a good point. Even if dragons existed, there was no reason why they would match modern weaponry in lethality. And they were assisted by the military after all. At the same time though, they conveniently ignored that in the legends of old, dragons could contend against angels and monsters. Before the miracles spoken of in myth, current human technology counted for little. But right now, they could only subconsciously avoid this reasoning so as to comfort themselves. The dragon got up. It unfolded its wings, and instantly the surroundings were cloaked in darkness. As it reared its head, the party got a better look at its incredible stature. At that moment, everyone took a nervous gulp. Humans. The creature widened its maw, and strange sounds erupted from its mouth. They were syllabic in structure and did not match the ravings of a beast. Little did they know that it was pure dragon language. Professor Johnson was stumped. With his lifetime of knowledge and dabbling in other disciplines, he could appreciate the linguistic structure in the dragon's speech. In other words, it can talk. The professor screamed and the captain, fear seizing his heart, roared, "Fire, Nav Om!" The next moment the soldiers sent a volley of tranquilizer darts in its way. Chapter 38. The Terror of the Giant Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ahead of their journey, the soldiers had prepared many potent tranquilizers, so potent that they could instantly knock out any large animals. In most cases, the thin and firm needle, assisted by the kinetic energy of being fired, could easily pierce through the skin of an animal. Once the darts pierced the skin, the residual momentum would inject the tranquilizing agent directly into the target's bloodstream. In a matter of seconds, even large animals would succumb to a medicated slumber. This was yet another example of human dominance through technology. Right after the tranquilizers were fired, the captain felt a sense of calm. He knew, rationally, that they would easily pierce the dragon's scales. And the anesthetic within them could put a herd of elephants to sleep. In fact, he began to worry that they had gone overkill and endangered its life. After all, in high enough amounts, anesthesia could be lethal. Ding 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 ding, of course, that was far from what happened. From the very beginning, the darts had no chance of piercing Louis's scales. Rather they stopped dead in their tracks or glanced off when they made contact with him. The dragon lowered its head and looked at the tranquilizer needles that had fallen to the ground. Its gaze remained emotionless and cruel. Suddenly, it unfurled its wings again and raised its head. Under the apprehensive stares of the combatants and Professor Johnson, a ball of light crept from its chest to its neck before finally reaching its throat. It opened its mouth, and the next instant spouted golden flames. Whoosh, the fire swept past the earth, leaving a deep ditch on the ground. It caught the expeditionary force completely by surprise. Ah, there were blood. Curdling screams as it swept through the combatants. And even after incinerating them, the tongues of flame surged on, burning everything in their way until the forest behind them had been reduced to ashes. 3 of the soldiers were hit in the face and were cremated instantly. The guns and other metallic objects in their hands had melted into glowing dollops of steel. From the top of the forest canopy, one could see white smoke emerge from a locus of blackened trees. Small clusters of golden flame lay littered about, burning the very soil they lay on. The color of fire depended on the temperature, density of the atmosphere, and the object of combustion. That said, the golden flames the dragon had belched would no doubt stump many. No! Lucy screamed in terror, but the area was wrapped in absolute silence as all the animals had already run far away from the vicinity. Dragon breath. That's the legendary dragon breath, right? It was easy to fantasize about magical creatures when one was certain about never having to meet them. But when one stood in front of you, malicious, lethal, and cold-blooded, it was another story altogether. Hail Mary, full of grace. Father, please forgive my sins, the professor shivered. How could it possibly breathe fire without burning its own flesh? How are its organs protected from such heat? Terrified and filled with even greater curiosity, the professor held his head as he mumbled. Nature was replete with animals that could discharge powerful electric currents on demand. But fire. Not to mention golden fire. This was something else entirely. And the fact that it could instantly cremate a troop of humans left Johnson in even more anxiety. Switch to live ammunition, the captain barked, trembling. Putting aside the death of his subordinates, he ordered the remainder of his troop to immediately commence its counterattack. At the same time, he fired signal flares, asking for reinforcements. The surviving troop members quickly swapped out their ammunition with practiced movements. The fear of the dragons hurried them on even without the captain's instruction. Soon another volley, this time of real bullets, made its way to the dragon. Each soldier made sure to empty their magazines completely. Unfortunately, their efforts were not to be rewarded. Just as the tranquilizer darts, the bullets did little apparent damage to the dragon's scales. As if the bullets were hitting cotton, they lost all kinetic energy upon contact. Soon every bullet lay at the dragon's feet, utterly devoid of any energy. The captain could not fathom what was happening. Lowly worms. Louis roared with powerful might. He was still using the dragon language, but this time it was clear to all that it possessed the power of speech. Louis could have tried to sweet-talk his way out, but that was not the mindset of the strong. Moreover, humans were especially hard to trust. Unless he was invincible to the point of being able to take on nuclear weapons, he would not foolishly discuss anything with them. Louis's plan for Earth was to make all countries nervous and awestruck by his power. To do this he could not afford to show any weakness to his enemies and give them a chance to capture him. Following his draconic instincts, he lunged at the party. Shit! It's too fast. A squad member fell to his claws as soon as he spoke. In a trice, his body fell to the floor in dismembered chunks. You damned monster! After their fear reached the extremes, the military continued to shoot at Louis like mad. A few lobbed grenades at him when they could. Boom! Bullets, explosions, and fragments from grenades flew in the air, but when they hit the dragon's body, they all seemed to become like cotton, and their momentums fell to zero. Their hot weapons had no effect. A Hollywood-style massacre took place in the Amazon jungle. At this time, another 3 Apache helicopters were also approaching the spot where the distress signal was sent. Chapter 39. This giant dragon speaks English. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The truth was that Hollywood blockbusters were deceptive. Film after film portrayed a rag-tag group of soldiers hacking their way through impressive monsters or mysterious aliens. Relying on nothing but their iron wills, bravery and skill, they would banish all attackers and save the world. Total bullshit. Aliens and monsters would never be as stupid as they were portrayed in the movies. With their intelligence and power, why would they fight humans on their terms? The soldiers' equipment was useless before the dragon's natural defenses. Bullets ricocheted off, frag grenades bounced away and even a howitzer shell was stopped dead in its tracks. A crazy soldier even took out a knife to slash at the reptile but was rebuffed with a flick of its tail. He was promptly snapped in half. Well, it was not as though their attacks did absolutely nothing. At the very least they managed to smudge Louis's scales slightly. He might need to give them a good wiping to get them gleaming again. Louis was unbelievable fast and unbelievable strong to the soldiers. All too soon the battle was over, and the soldiers' dismembered corpses littered the forest floor. After his evolution, Louis's genes had become optimized. Even juvenile dragons from San Soliel would be unable to bridge the gaps in their physical abilities. Truly he was the Terran civilization's ultimate strategic weapon. Professor. What do we do? A trembling student turned to their mentor. Among his peers, he was the only one who could still stand. All the others had collapsed moments ago and were lying on the ground crying and vomiting. The dragon's vicious motions and the gruesome aftermath of its assault had left them paralyzed in terror. Perhaps of all its victims, the 3 who had died initially had it best. Their deaths were instant and clean, unlike their mangled and dismembered compatriots. A few unfortunate soldiers were split in 2, their entrails decorating the forest floor right before their own horrified eyes. Their screams as the pain clouded their final moments rent the otherwise tranquil air of the Amazon. None of the students had ever expected to witness such a wretched scene. Of course, myths told of how only special weapons could harm dragons, but they never expected even modern weaponry to do absolutely nothing. I don't know what to do. I haven't studied how to survive against a dragon. The professor was no different. He knew how to survive in the wild, and he knew how to avoid or confront wild animals if need be, but nothing in all his years of experience and education could prepare him for this. Louis flicked the blood and bile off his claws with a single fluid motion. Satisfied at their cleanliness, he gazed straight at the professor and his students. He did not intend to kill them. Not only had they not attacked him, but they could prove themselves useful. Foolish mortals, he boomed, this is the result of your arrogance. Did you really think you were a match for a dragon? Raising his head, he spoke in the draconic tongue. It was not that he forgot how to speak English, but that he felt it humiliating to recourse to it immediately. At Louis's words, the professor had a revelation. He quickly fell to his knees and shouted, "Mighty dragon, we did not mean to intrude into your territory. We are just a group of researchers and have nothing to do with those soldiers who launched an attack on you." Ignoring whether the dragon understood English or not, there was nothing wrong with begging for mercy. Moreover, he had to quickly disassociate himself and the students from the soldiers. The other students followed suit immediately. "Shut up." Suddenly Louis spoke in English. His tone was sharp, and his accent clearly American. The professor and his students froze. It actually speaks English, he thought inwardly. A small part of him wished he had researched mythical creatures instead of biology. "Stupid mortals, is this your current language?" So inelegant and harsh on the ears, Louis spoke with strong contempt for the human race. His words made it seem as if humans were nothing more than some humble worm, or his food. This dragon can speak English. The young girl named Lucy accidentally murmured out loud. Realizing her misstep, she covered her mouth. Gazing at the dragon in front of her, she felt trepidation at having caught its attention. English. It is not worth anything. Such a crude language can be learned at once with a simple language comprehension spell. Louis approached Lucy slowly. His hot sulfuric breath caused her eyes to water and made her feel as though she stood at the rim of a volcano. She remained silent as she trembled. Language comprehension. Spell. Magic, the students wondered. Somewhere, deep within the recesses of their horror lay a spark of curiosity and excitement. Who had not dreamed of a world of magic? But soon, they shivered and lowered their heads again. Right now they were fishes on a chopping block, the terrifying dragon's captives. Suddenly, the sound of wind and propellers could be heard. The branches of the trees were blown aside by the gale. Louis raised his head to the sky and saw 3 helicopters approaching his location. Humans always invent interesting toys. With these words, Louis shot up the sky and charged at the aircraft. Chapter 40. The Dragon's Railgun. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alpha Squad, this is the Helicopter Support Detachment. Come in when you hear me. Come in when you hear me. 3 Apache helicopter gunships were heading to the location where the ground squad had signaled for help. The buzz of their propellers either chased or aroused the curiosity of the forest's many denizens. The Boeing AH.64 Apache, despite its shortcomings, was one of the world's best in terms of integrated performance, having followed the United States of America's forces across major battlefields. One of the pilots listened carefully into his headset in hopes of making out any trace of response. He checked the signal and confirmed that it was adequate. Even within the jungle, it should have been easy to communicate. FUCK, there's no response. I don't know what the hell happened down there. Increase flight speed and stay alert. Yes, sir. The thick green forest canopy made it nearly impossible to make out what was happening on the ground. Despite their anxiety, they could only proceed towards the distress signal's location. Suddenly the officer saw a golden flash from the corner of his eyes. His instincts kicked in as he prepared for a missile strike, but the helicopter's warning systems remained inert. In that case, it wasn't a Stinger missile or any kind of projectile. Just as he was about to look closer at the light's location, he felt a jolt as the aircraft's metal shell was struck by something. What the hell is going on? The next moment the helicopter was split in two, and both halves fell into the thick of the forest before detonating into burning wreckage. Its passengers had not realized what happened, but those on the 2 other helicopters saw everything. What the fuck is that? I don't know. It looks like some kind of lizard. Don't be stupid. Was the Alpha Squad wiped out by that thing? Shut up and fire already. Don't let it get close to us. Flustered but organized, the soldiers readied their weapons to launch a barrage of ammunition into their target. Louis had not presented himself directly to the helicopters at first. In his demigod dragon form, he would barely need to yawn before turning all 3 into scrap metal. But as a juvenile dragon, even a super one, he needed to act more prudently. Pitting his body in a direct confrontation with advanced weaponry would be dangerous and inefficient. Thus he opened his offensive with a sneak attack. Lunging from below, he had split the first chopper in 2 with his tail. At this, the other 2 readied their weapons for a counterattack. Each Apache is typically armed with Hydra rocket launchers and Hellfire anti-tank missiles. Equipped beneath the fuselage are M.230 chain guns with a firing rate of 600 rounds per minute each. Louis could not guarantee that his body could withstand the missiles or the chain guns. He might be happy to try it after his next evolution, but for now, he would focus on not getting hit. Noel.n at his current speed, the choppers would barely be able to lock onto him, to talk less of hitting him. And like his first attack, he had decided to take them on through special means. Aura of Fear. Louis activated the Aura of Fear of the Crown of Dominance. An invisible aura emanated with Louis as the center. In an instant, it stretched out to fill 1,000-meter radius. Countless animals fled from the zone in a chaotic stampede. The humans within the area were hit by intense hallucinations. Visions of hellish landscapes permeated their psyches as a profound fear took hold of their souls. The pilot of both aircraft lost control of their bodies and the helicopters began to tilt. They continued spraying bullets from the chain gun, but none of their ammunition hit Louis. Ah! Mama, don't come here, don't come here. Boom boom boom. Terrified screams and explosions rang through the forest. In the cruel landscape of smoke, fire, and burnt flesh, Louis remained a cold and composed countenance. This was the biggest weakness of Earth's technology or the biggest weakness of humans. In the world of San Soliel, the existence of occupations gave the inhabitants special powers. Although, aura of fear, was strong, the people there had a certain level of resistance towards it. For those people in the higher ranks of their occupation, the power was greatly reduced or even useless. This was not the case for the humans of Earth, so the ability was able to display its full power. The humans of Earth were nearly defenseless against attacks on the mind and soul. Compared to annihilation-type magics, attacks on the mind were a bigger disaster. The moment Louis activated the aura of fear, the humans had begun to go insane. Perhaps they would recover with time, but the trauma would definitely remain and resurface on occasion. Louis flew over one of the helicopters and casually raked his claws across its side. There was a burst of sparks as the aircraft crashed onto the forest floor in a sea of flame. He looked at his unblemished claws and smiled in satisfaction. Then he opened his mouth and centered the last helicopter within his vision. This was a perfect opportunity to practice his new ability. A deep static sound seemed to permeate the surroundings as his light converged on his location. Small but ferocious lightning sparked around his maw before a crackling burst of light was released towards the remaining helicopter. The lightning instantly penetrated the last aircraft, accompanied by a violent explosion. And so the veteran piece of machinery met its end in a completely unexpected way. This electric ability, which was the biggest enhancement of his evolution and gave him a powerful attack power, was exactly an electromagnetic cannon.